you can create a fulfilling life as an actor.
We know how hard it can be to pursue your dreams. There's no roadmap to success in our industry, which is why we're here for you.
I'm Cynthia Westfall, a Broadway music director, voice coach, and chair of the musical theater department at the University of Michigan.
And I'm Chelsea Wilson, a performer turned voice teacher to Broadway stars and vocal coach on Broadway, off-Broadway, and touring productions. We wear a lot of hats, but you can consider us your two-woman hype team.
Whether you're a Broadway pro, a community theater regular, or a young artist with big dreams, Broadway Vocal Coach is the place for you.
Welcome to the Broadway Vocal Coach podcast, where we help musical theater performers create fulfilling lives and take the next step in their careers. We have never done this in the same place.
That is correct.
We have never filmed podcasts in the same place.
We haven't really worked in the same place since you were a student in my office at the University of Michigan.
That was many a year ago.
That was many a year ago.
We've just been
and a lot of life has happened since that time.
Yeah, yeah. And so
you've had an entire career. A husband, two children.
I've had 2 children.
13 moves.
Yeah, that's what it feels like anyways. That's what it feels like.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been kind of wild, which makes it even better that you're here.
We're all here.
We're together in my office.
Which I've looked at online for so long, and now I'm sitting in. Which is a delight.
I love it. It's a delight. It's a delight to have you here. With that, we're here in my office. We're here in my office where I happen to do a lot of teaching. I do private voice teaching. I teach our studio classes for our BBC studio members. And that's what we want to talk a little bit about, is about voice teacher certification. And it's actually come up quite a bit recently with some of our studio members and more performers kind of seeing, like, is teaching something I might be interested in? Particularly, is teaching voice something I might be interested in? So I thought we could have a chat about my experience getting into that, how it differs from your experience getting into that, how both of our experiences are similar in many ways. Let's have a chat.
Let's do it.
So, Cynthia, your background is in conducting.
Yeah, piano.
Piano.
Yeah. My bachelor's and my master's are both in classical piano performance. But when I got my master's, I also got a minor in opera vocal performance. But my goal, once I realized that you really needed to be making your debut with a major symphony by 10 years old if you wanted to have a soloistic career, I sort of geared myself towards opera coaching. So voice has been a very big part of what I've wanted to do for a very long time. And I still remember my very first year at college, I played 27 voice juries. That number sticks.
Wow.
27
yeah, you're like, oh, number 26.
So in other words, I was playing for everybody. And was so exposed to so many voice. I mean, I was sitting in on 20 voice lessons a week for years throughout my bachelor's degree, throughout my master's degree. Even to some extent when I moved to New York, because I did a lot of coaching, or I did a lot of accompanying for people before I started coaching myself. So that was sort of my trajectory, but at the time it was all geared towards opera. It was all classical.
Yeah. So I'm curious, I know at some point after you'd been teaching for quite a while, at U of M, and you'd been doing, professional music direction and all of that, that at some point you were like, okay, maybe I want to learn more about, like, the voice side of things. So we've talked about that before in some other episodes. I'm curious, though, like, how did you seek out what kind of training you wanted for that? Because at this point in your career, you've had so much incredible experience, music directing and coaching and teaching at, like, the highest levels. So then how were you like, oh, I want to learn more about this other thing? Like, what avenue do I go for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there was a moment that happened on a Broadway show that I did at sort of the beginning of my career, where a singer, one of the leads, was really struggling with the big high note at the end of the big song. And I was keyboard player at this time, so I wasn't the music director of this production, but I remember the director yelling at the MD, the music director, "Fix it." like just got in his face and was like, fix it. That, that note, make that note happen, make that work. What is the problem? And I remember just, even though it wasn't my job at the time, I was sweating behind the keyboard thinking, because that's what I aspired to be at that point. I wanted to be the music director, and I thought, holy smokes, if that had been me, I wouldn't have known how to fix it.
Yeah.
I really wouldn't have known.
Yeah.
And God forbid I might have hurt his voice in my effort to try to fix it.
Right.
I might have said a number of things that I thought might have helped and might have actually made things worse. So that was my big kind of seminal moment for me in my career, that I realized, wow, if I really want to be an effective music director, I do need to know something about the voice. But, you get going in your career and you just get on that hamster wheel, and it's not like you can just stop and go, I'm going to go train for 5 years.
I'm going to go get another master's degree in voice.
So, I picked up things along the way. And like I said, I'd had a lot of classical training. But I found that the classical training didn't always address, like I was mostly working on rock pop shows. So it didn't always address that style. You couldn't use necessarily the same strategies. Or if you did, you ended up not getting the sound you needed. You ended up making them sound like we were singing Mozart instead of, Elton John. So then I started teaching at University of Michigan, and to be honest, a lot, my apologies to all those early students. You're one of them, where it was a little trial by fire and a little kind of learning my way as I was learning on the job to some extent.
Yeah.
And then I had a colleague who got exposed to Estill voice, and when she started talking about the workshops that she had been taking, that really clicked for me, because there was something about Estill voice that for me as a vocal coach seemed like that's what I need. Because when I thought back to this early moment of this one note in a song, specific situation that needs a fix quickly, there was a lot about Estill that seemed to work really well for that. Like the idea of recipes, like if you want this sound, you need a little more of this. If you want a little of that sound, you need a little of this. And it was like putting these 13 different voice parts together in different recipes to create the sound you needed. And obviously it's much more than that, but that was the thing that hooked me on Estill, that I thought, that, when it comes to musical theater and you need to be able to sing in a million different styles and make a million different colors with your voice, I really liked that mixing and matching of the recipe elements. So that's really what got me into Estill. I studied for probably close to 10 years before I did my final certification. And part of that was, as a pianist, I had studied piano for, 40 years by that point?
Just like a few years.
And I continued to, just like you'll take a voice lesson now. Like I kept taking piano lessons along the way. I mean, I had studied and studied and studied and continued to practice and continued to work. So it took me, the reason it took me 10 years, I think, to do my certification was just that's how long I needed before I believed that I could actually hang out a shingle and say, I know enough to call myself a voice teacher. It took a while.
That's amazing, because you had all this experience, but still it was like this skill that you were like, I don't know, it sounds to me like you were humble about it. Like, there's still so much for me to learn here. There's still so much that I really want and need to explore before I'm like, this is another thing that I do. That I do really well, in addition to all the other things that you do really well and at a high level. Over the time
that I had worked professionally, and I continue to work professionally, I have seen so many vocal injuries. I've seen people out for long lengths of time because of something going on vocally. I've seen people have to go through surgeries and rehab of all kinds. And so I've also seen some times when, input was given that maybe wasn't the most helpful. Totally. And so I had such a fear of just wanting to make sure that, just like any doctor, like do no harm. I just wanted to make sure that I never was going to do any harm.
Yeah.
And when you're in high stakes environment, like a Broadway show, and a director's yelling, fix it, and you've got one shot to do that without damaging the singer's voice, making anything worse, making that director that feels high stakes to me, and that's why it felt like you also don't have time at that point to go talk to another teacher, like, hey, here's the vocal issue I'm looking at. What do you think? You know, you've just got to move so quickly. So, yeah, that's why it really took me a while to feel like I knew, and I felt like I needed to get to a point where I could actually teach another teacher before I felt really comfortable using it with my students. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like Estill felt like a nice fit for the kinds of things you were hoping to do, like in your professional work. Like it was like an answer to some of the problems that you were seeing and facing, and then it was just this lovely confluence that another colleague had gotten involved. So it was just like, maybe you'd say those two factors that were like, oh yeah, this seems to be this particular program, this particular certification is answering my needs.
Yes, especially as a voice coach working in a multitude of styles. I don't do a lot of sort of building a voice from the ground up, or like really thinking about what you might call like a balanced instrument. I work more with singers who need to develop additional colors, singers who need to figure out different styles, singers who need to fix an issue. I can sing this style, but I can't hit that. I can't get above an A, or I can, you know, that is a little bit more what I do and what I love to do.
Yeah.
So I'm still at heart a pianist and a music director, so I like to have it be that versus just the voice teacher hat. That's less of my expertise. It's less of what I think is my gift. Whereas like I think you should be my voice teacher. Build my voice, Chelsea. You know, it's different. I think and I think it's why you and I work so well together, because we come at things in a different way, but still share a lot of the same language and a lot of the same goals and learning.
Right. I think so. But that's an interesting point about like where your gifts lie and like what you're interested in. Right? Like the kind of work, at the end of the day, I think if anyone's thinking about doing a voice teacher certification or is thinking about if that might be right for them, there's multiple avenues you can go. You know, we're talking about mine and yours are both private certification programs that we've gone through. Other people go and they do get a master's degree in vocal pedagogy or whatever. And I think you've really got to think about what lights you up about teaching. Like you're saying, like what you like is finding these different vocal colors, finding a fix for the show that you have to do tonight, those kinds of things. And
which as a music director, like that's
your job. That's the job.
And it really ticks me when people are like, oh, you just do fast fixes. It's like, yes, I do fast fixes because I have studied my butt off for 10 years to know how to be able to do a fast fix that is going to be healthy and sustainable. And usually whenever I do a fast fix, I will tell them, we're going to talk about this later so you know why that fix worked for you.
Right.
Because a fix, if a singer doesn't know why it worked, it's still, at the end of the day, sort of a cross your fingers and hope it works again the next night. If you don't know why it's working or what you're, you know, so, but it is different. Yeah, because I work so often in a music director setting that I need to come up with something quickly. I don't have the time over the course of a few months.
Right.
Which is why, you know, if someone can have sort of a voice teacher that wears more of your voice teacher hat and a voice coach who wears that kind of hat, like that's a...
Yeah.
And I love that you've got both hats. And I've got both hats, but I've got more of the coach hat.
And I have, same. I have less of the music direction whole thing and more of the voice teacher situation. Yeah, so as you're telling me your story and about this, I'm like, wow, my experience was so different because I feel like I started so young.
You were training as a voice teacher before you even got to college,
Before I even got to college.
That's
before I even got to college. So where you're like, I know this could go wrong. Like, I'm really going to take my time. My certification also was like a 10-year process as well. So I will say that. But I started at 17 and I was like, I don't know what I don't know. I'm gonna just get started. I'm gonna teach some 10-year-olds and, try and just use the knowledge that I have and like the voice teacher knowledge I was getting at the time. But like, I think that's in some ways important too, because like everyone's got to start somewhere, right?
Well, that's the thing. You do have to actually
You
start
have to
using
actually
the tools that you're learning.
to help someone. And in the meantime, you got to, you just have to figure it out.
And it does to some, you do have to have a little of trial and error.
Yes.
You can't learn without a little bit of, well, that didn't work.
Right.
Let me rethink.
And again, with that perspective of like, the goal is there, we're going to make an improvement. And for me, I think the biggest thing that my voice teacher certification and my voice teacher education has given me is, like what you're saying, the ability to get a singer from point A to point Z very, very quickly, as opposed to it is going to take me, the teacher, a long time to figure out how can I help this student get from this point to that point, right? Like that's what the teacher education is about, is like your own ability to make a difference in a student's voice, in their experience, more quickly, more efficiently. I think that's been so valuable for me. So my experience is a little bit different than yours, but similarly, I think it was just like this lucky thing of like, my voice teacher at the time was the CEO of Speech Level Singing, which was an organization out of LA. It was founded by Seth Riggs. He's like widely considered like the father of the mix. He like taught like every pop star in the 80s and 90s and a handful of teachers, and Seth Riggs kind of developed this teacher training program at the time. And so it was just happened to be like my voice teacher was part of this voice teaching organization. And so that felt like the natural fit. It was like, oh yeah, well, my voice teacher's already using this kind of language with me. Of course, if I'm interested in teaching voice and becoming certified, then that's where I'll go. I didn't even know about other programs or other certifications, you know what I mean?
But I can't imagine every one of his students
No.
felt that calling to think, oh, I should
do that. No. And I will say I felt really lucky because, you know, he was and is still such an important mentor to me, my teacher, Jeffrey. But like he saw something in me that was like, I think you would be a great teacher. Some of those things are like, you're really curious about the voice. You have a gift for communication. You're a bit of a natural leader. You like to help people get from point A to point B. You know, I think he saw those things in me. And then just from a total practical standpoint, I was like, I don't want to wait tables in New York. I don't want to do that. Like, I want this to be my side hustle. Yeah. So with that kind of forethought going into college, that's when I started my voice teacher certification. Many of our teachers from that organization founded IVA, Institute for Vocal Advancement, which is the organization I'm still with now, and that I do now get to teach other teachers, do teacher training. But similarly to you, the certification process was a 10-year process.
Yeah.
So all throughout that, though, I was teaching and learned so much just by teaching.
Yep.
And learned more about my voice. Like, my voice, of course, improved. I'm sure you can say the same, right? You're like, oh, this is why. This is how.
Yeah.
Which is a nice, like, bonus, I guess, to, like, learning, like, doing this kind of education. And, yeah, I highly recommend it.
So how do you know that teaching is for you? I know you said you had some qualities that your teacher saw in you back at age 17, but, you know, let's imagine it's a performer who's been in the biz for a little while, thinking of transitioning into something else, or maybe it is another college student who thinks, I don't want to wait tables, maybe I'm going to go down. How do you know if this is something that you're called to do?
Yeah, I think for me and you, we both have had this love for teaching and have found ourselves teaching voice or teaching musical theater. But I think there's a lot of avenues to consider where teaching can, you know, really like light you up. Like maybe you might find that you thrive being a Pilates instructor or workout instructor or a private trainer. Like there's all sorts of ways where you could say, this is something I'm passionate about. I actually do like teaching. A few things to consider if you're wondering if teaching is for you. Are you naturally curious? Do you like to learn? Do you want to figure out how things work? That's one. Are you a natural cheerleader for others? I think that's a huge part about teaching, particularly teaching voice, teaching acting, anything in that realm, don't you think?
Yeah, because I would say that one's tied to number one, that you have to be curious, but you have to be curious about more than just you becoming a better singer or you figuring something out for yourself. You have to be curious, because that's maybe one of the things I learned most over my 10 years was one size does not fit all. Everyone is so unique. Instruments are so, just like bodies, everybody is so unique, has their own issues and their own strengths, and you have to be curious about why something's not working for them. Yes. Not just your own voice.
In fact, that's why so many singers who come to me and have a conversation with me about like, oh, I'm thinking about doing a certification, blah, blah, blah. I've taught a little bit here and there, but I have found like the tools that work for me, I've tried them on my friends who've asked for me to coach them on a song, and like, it doesn't work. And you're like, no, duh. Sure doesn't. It doesn't work. And so I totally agree with you that that curiosity and that being a cheerleader for someone else, helping them to figure it out. Yeah. And I'm sure the same is true of being a personal trainer or a Pilates instructor. Like, there is no one size fits all. You've got to understand some basic principles, and then you have to be able to help apply these things in another voice. Yeah. So those are two things. A third, I would say, are you a problem solver for others? Like, consider, do you have friends or people in your life that like come to you for help or looking for a solution, or can you help me think this through? Like, that might also be a sign that you might be great in teaching someone something else.
But I would also add again, if everything you respond is always, well, what worked for me,
this is good. Yeah.
If everyone keeps coming to you for advice and you're saying, well, when I went through that and when that happened to me, then that is a little different. But if it's like, well, let's look at your situation. Let's talk about what you are going through, not just how I might have gone through that situation. You know, it is really different. I do think it's a little bit of a different mindset.
Yep. Wow. Agreed. Thank you for building on that point. Another thing I thought about is if you are mindful about communication, both verbally and physically, that's something you can learn and you can improve. And I think that's been a huge part of my voice teacher training. Something that we really emphasize in IVA is communication, language, using if-then statements, cause and effect teaching, not, trying to get away from a lot of imagery that's maybe one-size-fits-all imagery, right? You know, really trying to use language both verbally and physically to get a student to a result. So if that is something that you can even just begin to have some awareness of, that might be a good sign that teaching is something that you might be good at.
Yeah. Oh, I love that one. That plays into what we've talked about before. I don't think we've ever talked about it on a podcast, but my commitment to not using words like, I want you to, I like it when, because it's not about what you want them to do. It's what they need to experience and they need to figure out for themselves. Yeah. And communication, especially with a voice, because it's literally you. It's not, like the thing with the piano is it's this giant piece of furniture that is between you and the teacher, in essence, so anything that was ever said to me as a pianist, I could often just blame the piano. Oh, the notes are, the feel on this piano, oh, it's got a weird action, or, I always had, for better or for worse, there was always something between you personally and the teacher feedback. But when it is a voice, there is nothing in between you and the feedback. It is about you.
It's so emotional. You. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you are not willing to consider how you're communicating, and if you're not willing to consider the way you word things, think twice because it can really, you can really do a number on.
Well, I think so many.
Even those of us with the best intentions. Yes. We know we've said things in the past that we've thought, that wasn't maybe the way I meant that to be received.
Exactly. And, our commitment as teachers is just to continue to become more aware of that, become more committed to student-centered language, and that's just something we continually work on. I'm continually working on that. Yeah, but I think just having a general awareness of that is a good place to start.
And I care about it. Yeah. You have to really care about it.
Yeah, I agree. The last one I have on this list is that you love helping your friends or other folks that get from point A to point B. This kind of talks about what we were talking about, is like that curiosity to really help someone get from point A to point B when they ask for it, right? When they are looking for such advice and such help. But like, that's so much of my work is like sometimes even being the vision caster for a student. Like, I know you're stuck here at point A and you don't even know how you're going to get to that next step vocally or in your performance, or like to be able to feel that free in your voice and in your expression. And because I have experience doing this, I actually know this is possible for you. Let's come up with a plan to help you get there, right? And being able to kind of vision cast that for my students. And I think that's something that people naturally do in their lives and in their relationships, and that might be a way into teaching if that resonates with you.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. Yeah.
The other thing I'll say about teaching, and I really can't emphasize this enough, is that it has been, when I was still performing and auditioning, like this was the thing that made so much of my life possible for me. Like, it was my side hustle, but it also became my passion. It also became like this fulfilling thing that I was in charge of. You know, as an actor, as a performer, it can feel like you are just swimming upstream, just without a paddle. Like you're just, it can feel really overwhelming sometimes when your career feels outside of your control. And for me, learning a really practical skill like teaching voice, getting a certification in it, really feeling like I had training and, you know, could hang out my shingle and feel somewhat confident that I could help someone a little bit, and then over time could help somebody a little bit more. A lot. Helped me have so much confidence just in my life, in my finances, in like the trajectory of like, okay, everything else may be kind of up in the air and maybe up to a casting director at this point, but like this is something that I do and I can have confidence in and I can create myself. And so I think if you're at any stage of your career, at any stage of your life, listening to this and thinking, oh wow, that's kind of like freedom / you know, having a little bit of control over my life, that then grants me some freedom in my life, interests me, I would think about what kind of skills do you have that you might be interested in teaching to others? Because there's so many opportunities to turn your skills into something you can teach others.
I would agree. Yeah, I would just leave us with this, that it really is, to me, a service industry.
It is. It is.
You know, when you decide to go down the path of teaching, even, you know, I do know people like you who did have a performing career teaching on the side, or dual, you know, they're doing both. But the ones that I know like you who have been the most successful as a teacher while balancing a performing career is when they put that teacher hat on, it is about the client or the student. It is no longer about, like, it is such an egoless.
It has to be.
It really has to be.
Yeah.
It has to be egoless, I think, to be the most successful. And so just be aware of whether you're ready to take that on, that it is a service. You are doing everything you are doing on behalf of someone else, you know, and their success absolutely will feel like yours as well, but that can't be your focus, I don't think. I don't think that can be the reason you go into it. You've really got to go into it to be of service to someone else and help them achieve what they're trying to achieve.
One other question that came up recently in one of our master classes was one of our studio members asked, like, okay, you know, I love hearing how much your voice teacher certification has helped you as a singer. Like, you've obviously learned so much about the voice. I'm interested in that mostly for me. I'm not really all that interested in teaching. Like, would you still recommend doing some kind of a certification just if I wanted to learn more about the voice? And I'd just say from my perspective, at least what the training that I've done through Institute for Vocal Advancement, through IVA, it really is so teaching focused. We learn so much about the voice, but it's really all about like the art of teaching the lesson. There may be other voice teacher certifications out there that might be better suited to that. Like if you're just like, oh, I just want to learn more about the voice and I don't want to go and get a master's degree in this.
Honestly, with Estel, I could have done that. It didn't feel quite as, it was almost like two paths, because there were a lot of singers that were taking it with me, and there were a lot of voice teachers, and you could kind of either go either direction. In fact, one voice teacher I know, when she started down the Estel path, she had been in a fairly, without naming names and situation, she was in a very high profile role on a national tour and had an epic vocal fail. Epic. and it ended up on YouTube. You know, we've seen that, like the
Yeah.
Jean Valjean, you know,
Yes.
and it ends up on YouTube. And
Yep.
she, and what led her then to Estelle was she didn't know why it had happened, and she didn't know how to make sure it wouldn't happen again. And so for her, it wasn't about teaching at all. It was that she had that moment in that show, and she thought, I was in good voice. I had warmed up. I had done everything right. I wasn't sick. Nothing was wrong, quote unquote wrong.
Right.
And yet I had a full derailment on that ending note of that song.
Yeah.
And it ended up with everybody mocking me on YouTube. So, you know, it
That
wasn't
poor
that
person.
she initially went in as a teacher. It was
Right.
that she went in because she didn't know why it had happened, and she didn't know how to, you know, can you imagine? It made her very nervous to get up and do it again because she didn't know she didn't know if it would happen again.
Right.
Because she didn't know how to prevent it. So in other words, I do think there are people like that who really do get into it because they need to know for themselves as a performer. And then, you know, as she got into it, she's like, "Oh, this is cool. I think maybe I want to teach it."
Well, that's good to know. So that's
But-
what I would say is like my advice is if someone's looking into this is there's so many different options.
so many, yeah.
There's so many options, and I think so many people too are like, oh, I want to teach voice. I better go get another degree.
Yeah.
And I'll just say, listen, we love education. We do.
We do.
Cynthia.
I do it for a
You
living.
do it for a living. We love the university education. I also think that private certification can be a really amazing option.
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
get totally
Yep.
up to date and to just really implement the work really quickly.
Well, and I'm sure with IBA, similar to Estelle, you can take workshops over and over and over, and you need to.
Yes.
You know, the
The
first
education is
one you take,
continuous.
it's just information coming
Yes.
at you. You can't even process it all.
Right.
Then you take that same workshop again. You start to understand. Then you take it again, and you start
Yep.
to be able to verbalize. Then you take
Right.
it again, and you start to
Right.
be able to implement a little bit into your own singing or into your teaching. So, you know, I think for singers who aren't necessarily even interested in teaching, you can get a lot of benefit out of taking some workshops and just learning more about your anatomy, more about your voice. And I think that can be really, really helpful. And it doesn't need to lead to a 10-year
Right.
certification
Yeah,
process to get a
exactly.
huge benefit out of it.
Totally. I agree. Well, I'm excited for singers and performers who maybe have felt that like itch to teach. Hopefully this conversation has given folks some clarity about maybe this would be good for me. Maybe I would be good at this, and give you some confidence to know that like there's multiple avenues to go down.
Yeah.
If it feels like voice teaching is the thing, there's many roads to get there. If it feels like being a Pilates instructor is your thing, I'm sure there's many ways to get
Yep.
there too. And I hope that gives some people some freedom in their life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Broadway Vocal Coach Podcast. I hope it's inspired you to take action towards your big dreams. Head to the episode description for our show notes where you can connect with our guests, snag our freebies, and take our quiz. Head to bwayvocalcoach.com to see how you can work with us and take the next step in your career. While you're here, hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Talk soon, friend.